We will get the latest on the Air India flight that crashed shortly after takeoff in Gujarat on the way to the UK, killing at least 200 people, on the latest episode of the BBC's daily news podcast, Newscast. Hello, it's Adam in the Newscast studio, and shortly I'll be speaking to my colleague in Northern Ireland after there was a third night of violence there, which the most senior police officer in Northern Ireland has described as racist. But first of all, let's talk about what we know about the Air India crash that happened on Thursday morning. A flight taking off from Ahmedabad in Gujarat, heading to London Gatwick. So it had lots of British people on board. More than 200 people have been confirmed as dead, and reports suggest that there was one survivor who was British. So what do we know for definite? Let's speak now to my colleague Archana Shukla, who's a BBC correspondent in Mumbai. Hello, Archana.
Hi, Adam.
When did you first, as a journalist, become aware that something had happened?
Well, it was right a few minutes after the incident when news started trickling in on Twitter, and I was just scrolling through for general information, general news, scrolling through Twitter, and images of heavy smoke billowing were being, I could see that on Twitter, and then I started looking up on other sites, and other BBC colleagues also started pulling in that information. So it was really just a few minutes from when it had happened, and it quickly, information started trickling in that the scope of the damage and the devastation is much, much bigger. Just the fact that, the thick, heavy smoke in some of those initial videos that we saw, somewhere could indicate that the crash that has happened, or at that point, we didn't even know if it was a proper crash. But whatever had happened was big. And then slowly, other news, other videos, and, our local colleagues in Ahmedabad reached the site and started sharing information and images of the extent of this crash, which really is very, very big.
And in terms of concrete facts, one of the details we know for definite is the nationalities of the passengers on board, because that was released by Air India.
Well, yes, just about an hour or two after the crash happened, Air India released an official statement saying that there were 242 passengers and crew on board. 169 were Indian nationals, 53 British nationals, 7 Portuguese, and 1 Canadian. And, the fact that the aircraft actually crashed on a medical college building, also compounded the challenge. There could be some injured from there also who've been taken to the hospital.
And then in terms of how the Indian government and the airline are reacting, what's kind of the official reaction to this?
Well, immediately after the crash, multiple rescue operation teams, about 90 personnels initially had moved on to the rescue site from both the central, disaster management teams as well as the local teams. Air India has also deployed some of their officials from Delhi and Mumbai to travel and support the passenger families who are there and to support the investigation as well. And at the moment, from what we understand, about 130 personnel are on ground. There are multiple rescue operation teams working. The rescue operation, in terms of finding the survivors, is almost coming to its last leg right now. But as far as collecting the debris on ground, that would be the bigger challenge coming on. The government, on its part, has said they would provide all sorts of support for rescue as well as support to the families. Air India, on its part, has announced that they would be providing 1 crore Indian rupees, which is 86,000 pounds, to the families of those who have lost their lives on the plane.
And just help us understand the geography of India a bit, where this has actually all happened.
This happened in the western Indian city of Gujarat. Ahmedabad is the biggest metropolitan city in that state, and it's also one of the biggest, economically prosperous city in western India. Ahmedabad is and Gujarat is the home state of Prime Minister Narendra Modi, India's Home Minister Amit Shah. They all come from this state, and the state, typically Gujaratis, who have these Asian roots, West Asian roots, are called Gujaratis. Mostly are from the business and the trading background, and have a lot of connections with the United Kingdom. There's a large Gujarati diaspora in the UK as well, and many of the families on board this fateful aircraft were also going to meet their families in the UK.
Big British Gujarati links, and I know it's a bit of speculation at the moment, and it's quite hard to get facts on these things. But is it true that there was a survivor and that there was a British survivor?
This has been confirmed. There are, even our BBC colleagues on ground have been able to confirm this. There is one survivor, and this really is the smallest possible positive news from this very tragic incident that everybody is trying to hold on to. He's a British national, an Indian-born British national who has survived. He has told local media that when the crash happened, he could jump out of the aircraft. He is injured, though, and is now in the hospital. He had boarded the flight with his brother. The news about his brother is yet not confirmed, whether he has, he's survived, he's one of those who's been injured, or he's one on the list, casualty list is yet not clear. But yes, there is confirmation that there is at least one survivor.
Archana, thank you very much.
Thank you, Adam.
Let's find out a bit more about the plane, the airline, and the company that built the plane, Boeing. Earlier on, I spoke to Ben Katz, who is the aviation reporter for the Wall Street Journal. Hello, Ben.
Hi.
Thanks for joining us on Newscast. First of all, when you're reporting on a story like this, what do you do? Do you have a sort of checklist of things that you need to do?
Yeah, definitely. It's a good question. The first thing we do is just try and identify what the flight was. It's really the basic details. Often the kind of early reports, the local news, says there's been a plane crash. It kind of identifies the region. That's when we jump onto the flight tracking websites and we start tracking it down. The aviation industry is quite an incredible one to cover because every commercial aircraft is tracked everywhere in the world. And once you've identified the aircraft, you've identified the flight, you can really start looking at the granular data as to what happened, what stage of flight the aircraft was in, how long it was in the air, etc. So that's really the starting point. And then, of course, we do what every other journalist does, covering any incident, which is trawl through, the internet, look through social media, try and find out if there are any videos, anything that can help, piece together what might have happened, while at the same time, obviously contacting the authorities, the airline, the company that made the aircraft, etc.
And so in this case, this was a Boeing 7878, aka the Dreamliner.
The Dreamliner, yes, which is really significant. It's a really significant and horrible moment in this aircraft's history. The first fatal accident involving a 787 Dreamliner. The aircraft was first delivered and entered service in 2011 around. This aircraft involved in today's crash was delivered in 2014, so it'd been operating for about 11 years. The Dreamliner until now has had a pretty much unblemished safety record. So today's news is of course horrible, firstly for the passengers and the families and the crew, but it's also quite a historical moment in the history of this model.
We can come on to the business implications for Boeing, the manufacturer, in a second. But in terms of investigating potential causes, the internet, of course, is awash with theories already from armchair experts looking at all those videos in a much less precise way than you do. But what's the actual process for determining the cause?
So it's a very formal standard procedure that happens. It's delineated at a United Nations level. So what happens is you have the country where the airline is based, and also where the aircraft was operating. They will lead the investigation. They'll then draw in the help, in this case, of the FAA and the NTSB, which are two of the authorities in the US. That's because this aircraft is a Boeing aircraft manufactured and certified in the US. The engines are made by General Electric, so the US will also be involved because of that. If this had happened to be an Airbus aircraft with Rolls-Royce engines, then you'd have British and French, authorities, coming in to help and assist. The first step, of course, is going through the wreckage and trying to find the recorders. That's the two black boxes. The one is the cockpit voice recorder, which does, as its name implies, it records everything and all the sounds in the cockpit. The other is the flight data recorder, and that tells you everything from the position of the flaps on the aircraft to the speed it was going at, its altitude. Taken together, once that's all downloaded, you really get a full picture of what was going on in the aircraft.
And do you have a theory? And I know don't want to put you on the spot or make you do something irresponsible, but just from what you've been observing so far.
There's definitely a lot that's being picked apart. As you say, a lot of internet sleuths trying to piece it all together. It does seem to be a couple of anomalies that might be worth pointing out. The one is in the videos you can see that the landing gear haven't retracted as early as you might expect them to have been retracted after takeoff. The same can be said, well, in reverse about the flaps. So the flaps on the wings, which typically are used to control altitude and direction, those were retracted at a stage of flight when you wouldn't necessarily expect them to be. The reason for that, we don't know. It could range anywhere from, an issue with the flight crew. Maybe there was a mistake that was made. It could be a manufacturing or a maintenance default, or anything in between. So it's very, very early, way too early to attribute blame in any way, shape, or form, or even to guess that those two examples are contributing factors. But they are definitely two things that have been highlighted.
And can you tell us anything about Air India's safety record?
So Air India it's a very interesting carrier. It's undergoing this transformation since 2022. Up until then, it was state-owned, and then Tata Group, which we know quite well in the UK, they bought it out. They've spent billions on brand new aircraft that they've been incorporating into the fleet. They've been turning around the maintenance operations, the whole HQ. They've been retrofitting some of their older aircraft, so putting in brand new seats, doing a big marketing campaign. They've really been trying to revitalize this flag carrier that was really waning over the last few decades. In terms of safety, it's difficult to kind of rank one airline kind of better or worse than others. There have been incidents in Air India's past, but not under this new ownership. And this new ownership really has kind of prioritized, making sure that the operation is spick and span and operating properly and well. So yeah, but a lot of questions here, especially if the evidence starts pointing to, for example, a maintenance issue that may have caused the aircraft to come down.
And I suppose it's of limited relevance here because this was an international flight, but the Indian domestic air travel market is absolutely booming. And this is only just the start of it because there are so many Indians who've never been on a plane but will do in the next few decades.
Absolutely. I mean, it's something we hear from Airbus and Boeing on repeat, and we have for a number of years, which is India is, the fastest growing. They kind of compete with China a little bit. There are some forecasts that say that it will become the biggest market for aviation in the world. Population of around 1 billion people, many of whom don't fly or have never flown. And that's also been part of Air India's strategy. They're seeing that. They want to, capitalize on that boom in domestic travel, but then also as that growing middle class starts to develop in India, be able to connect the country to the world. So Air India really has this ambition to become, almost what Emirates is to Dubai, a hub airport, a destination, but also a place where you can connect, and India can be kind of the gateway to Asia.
And also, it's just geographically a huge country. So to get from one end to the other, and even not from one end to the other, just from the middle to the rest of the middle, you have to fly. Otherwise, it's like a 10-hour bus journey.
Yeah, exactly. And we've seen that, Air India, I mean, they announced at the time it was the biggest combined order for 470 aircraft. If I'm right, a year later they announced another 100. They're rumored to announce another order at next week at the Paris Air Show. So the airline is constantly buying its competitors on the domestic arm. They're also buying more aircraft. There is so much capacity going into this market. Um, and this is also, it's to bring it all together, this is part of the concern about a crash like this is it's such a visceral thing to happen, especially when you're trying to encourage an entirely new group of people who haven't, built flying into their everyday, to try and encourage them that this is a safe and affordable and exciting way to travel, and that they should.
Um,
Um, yeah.
And in terms of Boeing, the manufacturer of the Dreamliner of the 787, it seems to me as an outside observer, they were having a kind of better time of it as a company than they had done in previous years.
Yes, well, Boeing's kind of been in and out of crises for about the last 6 years. It really escalated again back in January last year. If you remember, there was an Alaska Airlines flight, and there was a door panel that fell off the aircraft mid-flight. That kind of triggered, a new crisis. The former CEO left the company. They've been under intense scrutiny from the regulator. But in the last few weeks, we've kind of seen them start to emerge from that. They got the blessing to increase production of the 787. They've been really positive about 737 production. And they also signed a really important settlement agreement with the Department of Justice, which basically allows them to avoid criminal prosecution over the 737 MAX crises. I know that's a bit of a jumble of information, but the bottom line is, yes, they have been and kind of emerging from what has been a very difficult few years.
Okay, Ben, thank you very much. And just to round off, when do you think we will get some kind of concrete details from the either the cockpit voice recorder or the black box or just the investigations that are underway?
It depends. It could be in the next few days, to be honest, but more likely in the next few weeks. A preliminary report probably in the next couple of months, and then the final report is typically a year after the event. But we'll start to see some of that information over the next few days and weeks.
Okay, Ben, thank you very much.
Thanks.
Now, on Wednesday night, there was a third night of violent disorder in Northern Ireland. This started on Monday in Ballymena in County Antrim, and by Wednesday night had spread to another town called Larne. And today, on Thursday afternoon, the Police Service of Northern Ireland did a news conference where they basically said that this violence was racially motivated. So let's try and join all the dots about what's been going on. And we can do that now with our Ireland correspondent, Sara Girvin. Hi, Sara.
Hello.
So I wonder if the easiest way for us to understand what's going on is just to do a bit of a timeline. Where do you want to start?
Yeah, look, it is quite complicated, and we've just heard from the Chief Constable of Northern Ireland, who's actually really helped us with that timeline. He was sort of at pains to point out what has happened over the last couple of days and explain that to people. So I think this all really started at the weekend on Saturday. That's when an alleged sexual assault took place against a young girl in the Balamina area, reportedly. Then fast forward a couple of days to Monday, two teenage boys, both 14-year-old, appeared in court charged with attempted rape. Now, in court, they spoke through a Romanian translator. They both denied through their solicitor the charges against them. And later that evening, what was organised was what the Chief Constable has described as today a lawful protest, about 4,000 people. And that was a protest against that assault. But he says, John Boucher, the Chief Constable of Northern Ireland, that event was hijacked, and that's when things turned violent. And he was very clear in saying today, the violence that we've seen over the past couple of days, he sees no other reason for those crimes other than racism. It was a Monday night when the homes of migrants began to be attacked. Some of them had smashed doors, smashed windows. Others were burnt out. On Monday night, people began to leave the area, obviously because they didn't feel safe. When we spoke to a lot of them the next morning, that took us into Tuesday morning, and they were packing up and leaving because they simply didn't feel safe as migrants living in that area anymore.
And then there was some more violence on Tuesday night, and then similar scenes on Wednesday night, but in a different place.
Yeah, absolutely. I would say the violence in Ballymena on Tuesday night was really quite intense. Police officers were attacked with petrol bombs, with bricks, with bottles, and police, in trying to get the situation under control, introduced police dogs, water cannons. They fired out baton rounds as well, just trying to bring that under control. Now, Wednesday night, I was in Ballymena last night. There was still violence. It wasn't as intense as the night before, but you're quite right in that although the seat of this has mainly been in Ballymena, it did start to spread. There were quite low level incidents in other towns across Northern Ireland, but there was quite a serious incident in Larne, sorry, that's about 20 miles away from Ballymena. And there we saw a leisure centre attacked. A crowd of young people gathered. They started throwing things at the window and then set the building on fire, though it was later brought under control. Now, there were people inside using the facilities there while all this was going on. There were people having a yoga class, there were swimming lessons going on. And of course, we've heard from lots of them today. They were left absolutely terrified by what was happening. Staff at the leisure centre had to leave through the back door. And the reasoning behind all of this, is reasoning is what you can call it, is because migrant families who had been targeted in Ballymena in the last two previous nights, well, they'd been moved temporarily to that leisure centre in Larne. That's why the building was attacked, although we're told by the local council there that they've all been safely relocated at this stage.
And I mean, that was very clear. Thank you. Do we know how many people have been injured, either police officers or people who were caught up in this?
Yeah, I do have some figures for you. The latest ones I have, and we've actually just heard about them. 41 police officers injured at this stage. We've heard that there have been 13 arrests, but just in the last little while, the police constable, the chief constable of Northern Ireland, John Boucher, said there would probably be more. What we've noticed during the violence, during the disorder, is a lot of police drones, a lot of footage being taken, and we heard more about what the police plan to do with those today. They've been taking images of those that they believe are involved in carrying out this violence, and they've said today that they plan to maybe publish those next week. This is a tactic they've done before when there has been violence on the streets of Northern Ireland. And John Boucher was really clear in what he said today. There was a plea to stop, of course, because there have been many of those over the past couple of days. But he said, look, if you're involved in this violence, we're going to come after you. We will arrest you and we will prosecute you.
And John Boucher, just reading about the briefing that he's just given to all your journalists a little while ago, I mean, he's been quite explicit in terms of how he is labelling what he thinks this is. I don't mean he's using swear words. I mean just the words he's using.
Yeah, look, I think that's really fair. We have heard from other police officers earlier this week who have called what is happening racist thuggery. They've come under a lot of criticism for using words like that over the past couple of days. But, you know, John Butcher really doubled down on that today and said that he could see no other reason for these crimes than racism. He was really, really direct about that. And he had, I suppose, a message for diverse communities in Northern Ireland. He said, look, we stand shoulder to shoulder with you. We're here to support you. We are your police service. And I think there was something that he mentioned a lot today during the press conference, and that was resourcing. It's something that he's talked about a lot since he became the Chief Constable here in Northern Ireland. He says there are too few police officers here. He estimated today that we're 400 community officers short here in terms of what there should be. As I say, it's something he's talked about at length. He says the PSNI is underfunded, but on the same side of that was very at pains to say, look, we've got this. We are going to police this situation, but it can't go on and we need more money. The PSNI has had to call in what's described as mutual aid. So that means they ask for help from other police forces when they are up against it, as they do certainly seem to be in this situation. And we now know that 80 police officers are on their way from Scotland today to help try to deal with this trouble.
And are questions being asked of how the police have handled this overall? Because we're talking about the third night of violence here, not the first or second.
Yeah, I mean, there was a very direct question asked today in terms of, look, has the PSNI got a grip of this? And I suppose the Chief Constable was quite direct in his response. He said that the violence and that level of violence wasn't expected on Monday. They weren't resourced for that, he says. But he says they were resourced the next 2 nights. We're on to night 3. This is the fourth night. We don't know if anything's going to happen or not. He says, look, it's been challenging to manage it, but they are doing that. But he was very clear on saying, look, the blame does not lie with the police here. It does not lie with the PSNI. It lies with the perpetrators and those carrying out the violence.
And just in terms of your reporting, when you speak to people who've witnessed this or been caught up in it, what sort of things do they say about what it's been like?
Look, it's been very difficult. People have had a really awful time in their homes. We've heard reports of people's homes being attacked and them having to hide it in wardrobes and attics, totally terrified. I spoke to one Romanian woman who's been living in Northern Ireland for 10 years. She was at home with 3 small children when her home began to be attacked. She left really quickly. She packed up and she went to a friend's house and then was being sent social media videos of protesters, rioters breaking into her home, smashing the windows down and going inside and trying to set her home alight. So you could only imagine how distressing that would be. And she told us, like, she's not going to come back to her house, but she's built a life in Northern Ireland and she hopes to stay here. Now, we've also spoken to residents who've been living in that area for even longer than that. And they've told us that there have been tensions around immigration in that area building for years, and that they believe this alleged sexual assault was really the catalyst for what has happened over the past a couple of days. They would say there is a small minority of migrants who have come to that area who haven't integrated with the local community, they say, and that they say has caused tensions, and they don't believe that their concerns have taken seriously. They feel frustrated, they feel angry, and they believe that's what's led to the last few days.
And this is probably a difficult question to answer, but do you think there might be a kind of new approach to community building in Northern Ireland as a result of this? Because Northern Ireland is a place that knows about having to build links between communities that don't necessarily speak to each other. But could this be a kind of new phase?
I think that is a really difficult question. I totally get where you're coming from. And it was interesting to hear the Chief Constable allude to Northern Ireland's, I suppose, troubled past, like 30 years of violence known as the Troubles here, and saying, look, we should know better than anyone that this isn't the way to go, that we need to work and live with each other. But also interesting to note, because I have been looking at these figures over the past couple of days, only 3.5% of people in Northern Ireland, according to the last census, aren't white. There isn't a massive non-white community in Northern Ireland. And I think a lot of people didn't come here for a very long time because it was a very troubled place. This is new to a lot of communities. Some of them do have concerns, but they're being told, violence is not the way to deal with those concerns. Everyone needs to get round the table and speak to each other and live with each other.
And in terms of the Northern Ireland Assembly and the Northern Ireland Executive, I mean, there's been times in the past where there's been real tension in Northern Ireland and those institutions haven't really been sitting. How are they handling it?
Yeah, look, I think that's really fair to say. You know, you could argue that there's not a lot that brings politicians in Northern Ireland together at times, but they have been very united in condemning the violence of the past few days and asking for it to stop. You know, notably, it doesn't happen a lot. They put out a joint press office or joint press statement from the executive, from every party in Northern Ireland, condemning this violence, offering their support to the communities who have come under attack and asking for it to stop with one voice. And I think that is really noteworthy.
And are you picking up any sense of a kind of mass community kind of counter protest to this? I'm thinking back to the riots in England after the Southport attacks last summer, where there was a night where there was a lot of tension, a lot of speculation that there was a list of places that were going to be targeted. And actually, the news story that night ended up being hundreds and hundreds of people coming out saying no.
Yeah, look, it would be absolutely, this has been condemned up and down Northern Ireland from all quarters. We're not getting a sense of anything like that being organised just at the moment. I think because the situation is still so intense and raw, and there is a fear there as well because it has been so violent, and it's difficult to describe what the atmosphere and the situation has felt like. It can turn within a matter of moments, and it has been very violent. People's homes have been burnt out, they have been absolutely wrecked, barricades have been set alight in town centres, and I just think there is a bit of a fear factor there in terms of other people coming out on the streets. But I wouldn't be surprised if it's something that we see soon. But I think that a grip on this violence, because it has been so intense and so difficult, would really need to be got before that happens.
And I suppose, okay, we're talking about two different places where this has erupted, but actually they are quite close and they are quite connected. So saying it's the violence is spread from one place to another, there's spreading and then there's spreading.
No, absolutely. Now, there have been more sort of low level incidents, I would describe them, in different towns. But you're right, in the same kind of area, you know, a 20-mile radius isn't really a big geographical area, but we are hearing news today. We've seen a letter from a housing association in Portadown in County Armagh, and that is quite a long way away from Larne and from Ballymena in County Antrim. And it sent letters to its residents today saying that there will be a demonstration there tonight, in its words, in the wording of the letter, directed towards migrants, foreign nationals, and what are perceived as deviant behaviour. Now, look, in that letter, there's advice for people, for those residents, to stay with family and friends, which is quite serious advice during that protest, because it could lead to, again, what it describes as an unsafe situation. So I think people are really looking towards the end of this week to see how things will pan out, but absolutely being prepared for the worst, but really, really hoping for the best.
Well, Sarah, thank you for making that so clear for us.
Thank you.